Toni Nadal. How do I get into this guy's brain? This guy, can you imagine? Let me just talk about what it must have been like when, let's say you're a club coach and you're coaching some good juniors and you have a chance to work with the young Rafael Nadal. Imagine the luck, just the sheer luck. It's kind of like hitting the lottery, right? It's kind of like getting the Mega Millions lottery ticket, and your brother's son. It's your brother's son, so it's someone in your family, and you make a deal with the dad that you'll be in charge of the kids' training. So that's kind of what Toni did. If you read Rafael's autobiography, great autobiography, by the way, Rafa. Toni somehow sidled in there, and he was able to take over all of Rafa's training at a young age. I don't remember exactly the age, but under 10. And it turns out that the kid that you're training is one of the greatest athletes of all time. What are the chances? What luck. Incredible for Toni. And you get the sense from watching Toni on video, just me getting to know him, also from the time I spent interviewing him, that he really wanted to be, I think, famous. I think this is my opinion, my interpretation, but you get the sense that he really wanted to be a famous coach, a guru, and he's a philosopher of the game. He has a gravitas to him. He speaks with great authority, and he speaks like a guru, like a philosopher does. He makes broad generalizations about life and tennis, and he's very good at extrapolating thematic elements from specific stories and training experiences. And I think that's one of his strengths. He has a great mind, a great philosopher's mind, and he has a high intelligence. You can tell he's quite bright. And so I can imagine when he was just a club coach. He wasn't a professional tennis player. He was, I think, a pretty good soccer player. And he was working at a club in Mallorca, and he was probably thinking to himself, like most young coaches do, is where am I going to find my champion? And where am I going to find a player who can take me to the top of the world and so I can become famous or well known, or I can get the respect that I deserve. And he did it. He did it, and he did it in the most fantastic, fabulous way. This player that he found, his nephew, not only became a great player, but one of the best of all time. 19 Grand Slams now, if I'm not mistaken. How many Roland Garros? 11? At least. It's an incredible accomplishment. So it's basically every high-performance junior coach's dream. It's a dream that, I'll admit it, I've had that dream to have a chance to work with a Grand Slam player. Forget one of the greatest players of all time. How about just a Grand Slam player, right? Incredible experience, incredible moment in time where he was able to find this young kid and help develop him into such a great champion. I know that most high-performance coaches, people that are in the junior development community, we all dream of that. We all dream of having that experience, of finding the golden ticket, the hitching your wagon to a superstar. And we all have that experience on certain levels. I've had a lot of good players who I've developed, top 10 players in the U.S., which is pretty good, to have a junior who is one of the best in the country. I've coached dozens and dozens of top nationally ranked kids, but never have I met someone yet who achieved as much as someone like Rafael Nadal. And most coaches, even the greatest coaches, some of the greatest coaches in the world, can't claim anything close to what Rafa and Toni did together. maybe once in more than one generation, this can happen. A great player like that, and so it's quite remarkable that he has this story, and he's willing to share it now. And so I think it's really interesting from that perspective. Like I mentioned before, I don't know if everyone's going to enjoy the courses the way I have, or the way I'm enjoying them now, because I have this unique background vis-a-vis Spain. But I think there's a lot of value, and I will be sharing more and more writing and doing more videos. I think in a future podcast and show, we will talk about more about the intermediate training course and the advanced training course, just to sort of give you a taste of what Toni's method is for those levels as well. Tonight I'm focusing a little more on philosophy, a basic philosophy of Toni, and his fundamentals approach, particularly in the mentor course. He calls it the mentor course, which is the first course for beginners. But we can talk a little bit about the intermediate course as well. And then I think in another podcast and show I will save. It's a lot to cover, so I will try to sort of break up some of his method into parts and share them on future shows, if that makes sense to you guys. This show, I will try to share more about the mentor course and maybe a little bit about the intermediate course, and just sort of get into the mind of Toni, sort of introduce you guys to what he's all about and his core philosophy and things like that. All right, so mentor course, beginning level, the beginning level for Toni. Interesting that you see a coach who has a few core beliefs. So the number one with a big exclamation point for Toni is the accompaniment of the ball. And he's obsessed with this idea of meeting the ball with a good relationship with the body and extending through the impact. And he calls that the accompaniment. And he says it's really important to accompany the ball well, so that way the ball comes inside the strings of the racket. So imagine that impact, the ball decomposing. If you ever seen a high-speed video of a ball hitting the strings of a racket, and the ball usually collapses. It collapses into the strings, and then it gets sent out on a rebound. And so that's kind of what Toni's talking about with the accompaniment. He says it's very important to let the ball inside the strings of the racket, and then to send the ball out with a long extension. And reminds me very much of the philosophy of Luis Bruguera. Luis Bruguera is a little older than Toni. He trained his son Sergi Bruguera to win the Roland Garros 2 times, in 1993 and 1994. And I see a lot of similarities between the Bruguera method and the Toni Nadal method, and that's something that I find fascinating. I don't know if it's too esoteric for you guys, or if it's like something that the average person in tennis has no interest in. But I find it very, very interesting with my personal background traveling and studying in Spain, and I spent so many years with Luis Bruguera and learning his method. So to see the similarities between the Nadal system, the core system, the basic philosophy, the basic approach to training, the method, to compare it, to see the similarities with the Bruguera method, to me are fascinating, and to try to find the connections. So this is one area where the connection is very, very strong. And for Luis Bruguera, he also is similarly obsessed with the line of the shot, which is the same as Toni, exactly the same. They are obsessed with the meeting the ball with a good relationship to the body, which is typically out in front and at a comfortable height and at a good distance from the body, and then extending out through the impact and throwing the racket forward and up, lifting and extending through the shot. And they believe that that is extremely important to the control of the shot and the power of the shot. And it's an absolute obsession. I don't mean that, I'm stressing that because it's a word that Toni uses hundreds and hundreds of times in his online course, and that it is very similar to it's the same concept that Luis Bruguera uses at his academy and all his coaches use, which is called the line. They call it the line, and Toni just calls it the accompaniment. And I'm sort of wondering if, did Toni actually take that from Luis and just rename it? Because it's so similar, it's very striking to me, very salient that he focuses in on this aspect of hitting the ball the same way that they do in the Bruguera system. So I'm wondering, Toni's a little younger. Luis started to have a lot of success in the early 90s, and I'm wondering if how much Toni was influenced by Luis. And I actually am going to call Luis and ask him, because I'm curious if maybe Toni came to some of Luis's workshops, or if at some point Toni spent time with Luis studying with him, made a visit maybe to Bruguera Academy back in the day, or somehow had access to some of Luis's philosophy and system, because I see so many similarities between the Nadal system and the Bruguera system at the fundamentals level, the core philosophical level, that I'm wondering if Toni was somehow exposed to that maybe in the early 90s. Bruguera started to have big success in the 80s and the early 90s, and he was a little older than Toni. So I'm wondering how much of an influence the Bruguera method had on the Nadal method. And I'm always looking for more and more interconnections between those two methods. Very interesting. At the same time, there was another successful coach, Pato Alvarez, whom I mentioned, who was more a part of the Sanchez lineage, the Sanchez clan, and he had a slightly different approach with a series of drills that were unique to him. And he was very focused on his baskets and the drills that he did. They are geometrically patterned drills that he linked together and chained. And for Pato Alvarez, he was also older than Toni, and he probably undoubtedly influenced Toni to some extent, but I don't see the same parallels or interconnections between the Nadal approach and the Sanchez system, which was started by Pato Alvarez. Pato Alvarez initially designed the Sanchez system, and then Emilio Sanchez and Sergio Casal took the Pato Alvarez method and sort of made it into their own as the Sanchez Casal, the academy philosophy that they have. But in any event, I don't see as much of an interconnection between those two systems as I do with the Nadal system and Bruguera. So just kind of interesting, maybe only for you Spanish nerds out there, Spanish tennis nerds out there, but I find it very interesting. I see more and more parallels between Bruguera and Toni than I do between Pato Alvarez and Toni. However, of all the years I've spent in Spain, the courses mean a lot to me personally, because I can see a lot of interconnections between other